Yes, well, hello again and welcome back to your number one and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel here on YouTube, and thanks once more for retuning as we try and rediscover more of those old school vintage dirt bikes from our racing past. Now, according to the amount of feedback I've had on my previous videos, it appears that at least 95% of my YouTube viewers enjoy my content. Now, of course, it's not to everybody's liking, but of course that's what it makes us all individuals. But once again, thanks to all of my viewers out there who have subscribed and have left positive feedback comments. So this next bike that we're going to take a look at is a machine that I filmed quite a few years ago now, but it's certainly a lot different from the run-of-the-mill Evolution bikes that you see going around. So let's just jump straight into the video and take a look at Steve Denton's immaculate 1986 CR250 Honda. And so this featured 1986 CR250 Honda Evolution bike is another one of the fantastic restorations that were undertaken by the Phil Denton Engineering Company, and the level of quality that this company turned out on these kind of Japanese bikes is absolutely first class. Now, from their premises in Station Road in North Wales, they provide all manner of services and parts for Japanese classic, twin shock and Evolution motocross machines. But to get the full picture on what they're all about, why don't you just take a look at their website at phildentonengineering.com. Now, the story of our feature bike here begins with Phil Denton's son Steve, who did all of the work on this bike, and it all really started when Steve began looking for an old CR Honda that he could upgrade or restore to showcase some of the parts and services that his Phil Denton company provide for these and other Japanese bikes. But Steve knew exactly the bike that he was after, as he wanted to do a sort of modern uptake on the Honda RC250 factory bike of 1986 and make it into an 86 CR250 with a rear disc brake. Now, it wasn't too long before Steve spotted a donor bike which was advertised for sale, but this particular bike was extremely rough, to say the least, and Steve said that it was advertised as a runner, but some of the list of the problems on that donor bike were vast, and one or two of the things that was wrong with it were that oil was leaking from just about every gasket, and the crank casings had also been smashed from where the kickstart gear had slipped, and Steve also said that there was some JB weld put over the broken hole. Now, the frame also had damage on the bottom rails, and the foot pegs were so droopy that you just couldn't even place your foot on top of them. But the list of problems went on and on, but Steve said he still likes to buy these kind of bikes rough because he's going to work on every single component anyway. So why pay to buy a good example when you're going to just rip it apart anyhow? And so after the donor bike was completely stripped of some of its parts, the list of usable parts was very small, and the pile of scrap that was left was absolutely enormous. But Steve still managed to use the frame and subframe, the seat base, swing arm, and most of the suspension components, and a few other bits and pieces. But the eventual list got even shorter when the final specification of the build was decided, because this particular CR250 Honda was going to be something completely different from your run-of-the-mill Evolution machines. And so beginning with the chassis, now the first job to tackle was to repair these bottom frame rails, which had been crushed almost flat for some strange reason. But after some hard graft and a bit of skill, Steve still managed to put them back into their stock trim once again. Now another task on the chassis side was to sort out the completely worn out footrest mounting holes, which Steve then re-engineered and finished them off by fitting these wider footrests. But as it turned out, the bike's rear subframe was bent and it was also twisted, so this again all had to be straightened out before the completed chassis could be prepped and then, of course, painted. And so as we move on to the motor, now, as I said, the donor bike had a set of damaged casings, so Steve then managed to pick up an almost complete motor from a well-used internet auction site, and this engine was stripped bare right down to its last component, and every part was vapor blasted so that it could be inspected. Now on the rebuild, the cylinder was re-Nicosil plated once again, and the ports were given some light restoration work. But once all of the casings, barrel and head had been given the all clear, these were all then sent off to be powder coated in this lovely satin black colour. Although to just say that this engine was simply rebuilt would be the understatement of the year, because the list of parts and work that's gone into putting this engine together is just mind-blowing, and the list of motor parts alone fills several A4 sheets of paper. So what you're actually looking at here is more than likely a better than brand new CR250 engine. But just to list a few of the parts on this engine, now it has a two-piece Honda alloy clutch case from a 1991 Honda bike with a billet alloy clutch basket, hub and all its associated new plates and springs. Now at the top end of the bike, a brand new Wiseco forged piston and new crankshaft assembly and a new power valve and CDI electronic ignition as well. And to feed the motor with its fuel, Steve then bolted on a 38mm key-in flat slide P.D.E carburetor, and this fed the fuel into the engine through a Boyson carbon fibre reed valve block. Although to list all of the brand new internals and the work that's gone into creating this new CR250 motor would probably add another half an hour onto this video, but one of the other things that you may not have noticed is that every nut, bolt and fastener on this bike is made from titanium. And just to give you an idea of the detail put into the CR250, even the small screws that hold on the carburetor's float bowl are also made from titanium. Now I expect that if I ever wanted to and took the time, I could quite easily produce a video and talk about the strip and rebuild of this engine alone, but for now I'm sure you've got the gist of what this engine's all about, because this motor's had many hours of reworking but is now ready to go. And so as we move on to the front suspension of the bike, as you can imagine, these again underwent the full Denton engineering makeover treatment, and these once more were all vapor blasted, and then the tubes were re-chromed and brand new seals, bushes, etc, etc, and a set of fork gaiters were also added to protect those precious stanchions. Now the front disc has been taken from a 1990s CR bike and has the 6-bolt disc hub fitted, and the front brake caliper and its mounting bracket have been taken from a 2003 CR250. But again, these have all titanium pistons, titanium slide pins, and titanium caliper mounting bolts as well. And even the caliper's bleed nipples are also made from that precious titanium metal. And so as we move on to the rear brake on our 86 Honda, now this was given an upgraded and more modern style hydraulic disc brake because, as you're aware, Honda still had the old school drum brake fitted on the back of these bikes in 1986. But of course then Honda changed to disc brakes at the back of their bikes in 1987. And as it turned out, fitting this brand new hydraulic disc brake was a bit of a lengthy process to get everything just right, but this rear brake caliper is also from a 1991 CR Honda, and once more, and as in the front stopper, all of the internal components and fixings are again all made from that very precious titanium metal once again. Now, when Steve was putting the bike together, he chose to fit an alloy swing arm from a 1987 Honda CR250, and the lower chain slipper assembly was custom made by P.D.E engineering, and the rear chain guide was supplied from UFO. But you can see here that it's all been very well engineered, and I'm deliberately keeping the details of parts fitted to this bike to the bare minimum, because if I did manage to list everything that this bike contained, then this video would eventually turn into a full feature film. Now, once again, Steve deliberately left the bike's rear shock as one of the last jobs to tackle on the bike, because he hadn't at that time made up his mind if he wanted to go with a complete new works performance unit or rebuild the bike's original. But in the end, he decided to just rebuild the bike's stock unit. Now, as you'd expect, the shock was completely dismantled and then vapour blasted and cleaned, and it was all then sent out for hard anodizing, and the gas reservoir part of the shock was anodized in bronze, and also a custom made connecting pipe was manufactured, and brand new spring load adjusters were then made in alloy, and along with all of the other alloy parts of the shock, these were also anodized. Now, the original shock's lower adjusters were seized, and so this was then all taken apart, where Steve then machined a brand new replacement in titanium. But again, it's suffice to say that all of the linkages and bushes, etc., were all renewed, and the rebuild of the unit was then completed by Kai's Suspension, who also revalved and finished off this brand new rear shock. Now, with the rest of this bike build being top of the range, then naturally a top performance exhaust expansion chamber had to be sourced, and Steve eventually opted for this Pro Circuit system, and then he used an alloy tailpipe with carbon fibre cover to complete this part of the bike, and you'll be able to hear the nice bark from this tailpipe later in the video. Now, when it came to the bike's fuel tank, now the old donor machine's fuel cell was certainly no use whatsoever on this new bike, and so Steve then had one shipped from the USA, which he said certainly look better, but they are slightly smaller than our own original European Honda fuel tanks. And as you can see, it still fits perfectly on our new bike, and it can still hold enough gas to feed that Honda motor on even the longest of race motos. Now, the old side panels and the plastics from the donor bike were thrown straight into the bin, as they were worse than useless to use on this new bike build, but a good second-hand set of plastics were located through the internet once again, and when Steve received them, he immediately sent them on to Phil Cox of Plastic Renovations in the USA, where he completely refurbished all of them, and they came back to the UK here looking like brand new once again. Now, once again, the bike's seat also received the very same restoration treatment from P.D.E engineering, whereby the original seat base was retained and restored, and then a brand new foam inner was then installed, and it was Evo Motocross in the UK who supplied the CR250's brand new seat cover. Now, finally, at the business end of the bike, all of the associated grips, cables, levers and throttle gasser were all top of the range items, and nothing was certainly too good or too expensive for this brand new bike. But naturally, Steve wasn't just content with any old type of fasteners to bolt these parts onto the handlebars, so he then got busy once again and machined all of these smaller parts from more titanium. But as I said, I've deliberately kept the list of parts used on this 86 CR250 build to the absolute minimum on this video, but if you want a more detailed list, then you can certainly pause this video and maybe take a look at the full list of parts that were used to put this exceptional bike together. And as you can see, the list of parts is vast and varied, and that of course doesn't include the many hours of hard work that went into restoring, renewing or making brand new components for this Evolution Honda. But when you do read this list, it looks like there's not many components that have escaped the P.D.E engineering treatment. Okay, so we've had a look at the bike and listed a few of the parts that went into its construction. So let's just now get Steve to fire her up and have a quick listen to what she sounds like. And so after the bike was completed, which was at the end of July 2016, it was already booked for its big racing debut at the Vets MXDN event at Farleigh Castle that September, and it was going to be ridden by American Honda factory rider Todd De Hoop. Now, at the first practice session at Farleigh Castle, Todd was absolutely flying on this Honda, and he easily was the quickest man on the track, although while he was leaping past a slower rider on the uphill steps section of the track. Todd was then pushed into the ropes, which then chose to wrap itself around the back wheel and derailing the chain, which then subsequently bunched up on the primary drive sprocket, which crushed the case saver and then bent the gear change selector shaft, and basically it put Todd out of contention for that weekend. But the bike's now 100% once more, and in the following 2017 racing season it was ridden to some good success by Steve himself in the Evolution class of the National Twin Shock Championships, just before giving Todd De Hoop another go at Farleigh Castle that same year. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's a Honda CR250 Evolution bike, unlike any other. Most of that bike, of course, as I said, had titanium fasteners, but a beautiful looking machine built by Steve Denton at Phil Denton Engineering. So coming up next here on my YouTube channel, I'm not exactly sure as to which bike we will feature next, because we do have quite a few lined up in the video archive, so we will be picking one out to show you in my next video posting here on my channel. But until then, everybody, thanks for your support and for watching my channel, and I'll see you soon.